Exchanging contracts is a big step in the property buying process. Today, we're going to be talking you through the exchange of contracts and what it means, and also what completion means. We'll also be talking to you about 10 things to consider before you exchange contracts. Hello, welcome back to our channel and podcast. My name's Gemma, and here at WS we talk about all things relating to money, mortgages and positive money mindset. So if that interests you, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the thumbs up. It really helps with our YouTube algorithm and means that you won't miss out on any of our videos. On today's episode of Let's Talk Money and Mortgages, we have Iftika joining us once again. And for those of you who don't know, Ifti is a trained accountant and mortgage advisor who's been in the industry for over 10 years. And he's also one of the founding directors here at WIS. Hi, how are you doing, Ifti?
Oh, very well, thank you. How are you doing, Gemma?
Yeah, I'm not bad, thank you. So today we're talking all about exchanging contracts, and it's really an area that not many people kind of spend a lot of time talking about, but there's so many things to know and consider when purchasing a property. So firstly, let's start at the very beginning. What does exchange of contract mean?
Okay, that's one of the biggest milestones in your property purchase. We often say the point of no return. That's the point at which you give your share of the deposit to the solicitor. Quite often it's 10% of the deposit, or if it's a smaller deposit, you put 100% of your deposit down. And then the solicitor agrees with the seller's solicitor on a date to transfer the ownership of the property. So that happens at the point of exchange. So at the point of exchange, you definitely know when you are getting the keys, unless it's a new build, which is sort of sometimes can take months before it's ready. But if it's an existing property, you will know right when you're going to get the keys. So that's a very, very important milestone. So if you exchange, you're more or less completing, right? So that's what it means, yeah.
So, okay, are you the legal owner on exchange of contracts?
That's a very, very good question, Gemma. You're not the legal owner, right? You only own the property and your name goes on to the land registry. But you have responsibilities from the point you exchanged, right? But you're not the legal owner for sure. Yeah.
All right, then, so these responsibilities, I guess that would be the difference, right, between the exchange and completion. So let's delve into what those are.
Yeah, so let's look at the differences. So with exchange, there's generally 4 things that happen, right? The seller signs something called a TR1 form. That's a transfer form, transferring the ownership, and he hands it over to the solicitor. Of course, the transfer doesn't take place on the date of exchange, but the solicitor has possession of it, and the solicitor will confirm to the buyer. Solicitor say, I have possession of this. So that's something that happens on the date of exchange. And obviously you've got, as a buyer, you need to hand over your deposit to the solicitor. So that takes place on that date, and you agree on a date to complete, right? So that also takes place on that date. And from a purchaser's point of view or the buyer's point of view, the solicitor confirms to the seller, yep, I've got the mortgage in order, I've got all the papers in order, we are good to go. So those 4 things take place on the day of exchange. So that's what exchange means, right? But completion is slightly different. Completion, for a lot of people, is the day you get the keys. That's what it means, right?
Yeah.
That's what it means. So on the day of completion, what usually happens is, if you're, say, the buyer, your solicitor transfers money across to the seller's solicitor, and the seller's solicitor will confirm that they've got the money, and they will inform the estate agent to hand over the keys to the new buyer, right? So that happens on the date of completion. So usually that day is known in advance. So as soon as you get the phone call, the movers start moving, right? So most people start moving just before that as well, because legally you can take possession of the keys, right? So that's what happens when you complete. That's the day you actually get the keys. So yeah, it's 2 big milestones if you're buying a property for sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah, exciting times. So what are the things that you have to do before you exchange contracts? We've got 10 points. Let's start with the first one. Go through the solicitor's pack to see if everything is in order. It's a good point,
That's
Ifti.
right. Be very careful. You pay the solicitors to do searches, right? The search results will come through a few weeks after you paid for that. So the solicitors will obviously communicate with the seller's solicitors as well, and they will send you a pack. Usually it comes out in the post, right? It will show you the search results, and it will show their findings. So for example, they'll have local searches, and they will have things like drainage searches, whether there's any risk of flooding. So those search results come. So the solicitors will highlight to you the important points that came out of these searches. So you need to go through that. It's a little bit of a long letter that the solicitor sent through, but go through it. If you're not sure, speak to an advisor or speak to the solicitor itself, because they will be able to make things clear to you. they will show you the things you need to be concerned about. So that will be in this pack. And also the pack will include things like easements and restrictive covenants, right? So I'll just touch base on what these things are. So if you are buying a property, even new builds have this, but I'll take the best example is something like a old property, which is like a listed building. So with listed buildings, there are certain things you can't do to the property. So that will go down as a restricted covenant, right? So there can be certain conditions like that. Even with new properties, nowadays you find a lot of covenants because they say, oh, this changes the structure of the whole estate. So therefore you can't do this, right? You can't put a new conservatory out or whatever it is. They put certain conditions down, right? So just be careful, read these conditions. And easements, like easements are usually, sometimes you have to allow people to walk through your garden, right? So there can be those things which may affect your privacy, right? So if you want privacy and you don't want people to do things like that, it may be on this document, right? So just make sure you go through this very carefully.
I've heard of people, especially with new builds, saying that a restricted covenant is something could be like even that you're not allowed to park your van outside, like you can't have vans on the estate or things like that. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I have heard of that. Yeah, it's quite common nowadays because they are very concerned about the look of the estate. So therefore, they sometimes put some of these conditions. So just be careful. A lot of people don't read this document in full. They quite often say, okay, where do I sign, right? So just be careful. Yeah, it's not like going through some privacy policy and signing it off. These are serious things, right? So you just need to be mindful that you have to go through this properly.
All right, thanks, Ifti. So let's move on to point number 2. Make sure you get a list of items from the seller and make sure it matches to what you originally agreed. That's a good one.
Okay, so usually when people say, I make an offer, say I'm buying a house for £100,000 and I make an offer. Quite often people say, okay, I'm offering 100,000 on the house, right? I would sort of take a step back and say, look, 100,000 should include these things, right? I'm just giving you a few examples. Things like curtain poles, sometimes
I knew you were going to say
take
that.
this away. Yeah, people take it away, right? Taps, right? I've had a situation where the lady had put some expensive taps. When she's gone, she's taken the expensive taps along with her. So you don't want those surprises, right? So when you make an offer, please make sure that you include certain things like that, right?
Yeah. So like even curtains and things,
even
right?
Curtains, if you want them, put them down, right? Because otherwise they go, right? The blinds can go as well, right? So suddenly you have to find a new person to fix your blinds, right? So with that, the solicitors usually send you a list of items which the seller is leaving back, right? It's a bit of a long document because it goes room by room, right? But just make sure you read through it and make sure that you have everything that you want. So there might be a nice wallpaper which you like, right? But you may have not negotiated it down, right? So if it's not in that list, you're not going to get it, right? So just make sure that it's in the list, right? So, later on you can talk to them about it, right? So just make sure you go through that list carefully and make sure you have everything left back what you want.
Yeah, so number 3, we've got make sure that you have the home insurance in place. Another kind of one of those controversial points that I feel like a lot of people, think, oh, I can just skip the insurance bit, but, it's important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think often solicitors remind you of this, right? Some solicitors say we won't exchange without a home insurance in place because all mortgage offers I've seen have a condition saying the house needs to have insurance in place, right? Especially if it's a house, right? Apartments are slightly different. But with houses, yes, you need to have this in place. This is why I said you have certain rights and obligations when it comes to the point of exchange. So your home insurance should be valid from the point of exchange, not completion, right? So because you are responsible for the house. So please make sure you, even if your solicitor doesn't ask, right? It's not an optional thing. You just need to have that in place because it's part of your mortgage condition. Just make sure you have your insurance in place for the house. Your buildings should be covered for sure.
Yeah, and then also number 4, we've got make sure the life insurance is in place because that's another important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I'll just use an example because I've heard of this story. Obviously, I've not seen it firsthand, but I have heard of this story. Yeah. So if you exchange when you're trying to buy a property, effectively you have a contract where you say, I am buying the house. So if you are unable to meet this purchase, you have certain liabilities, right? So for example, that deposit you put down, say 10%, lost, right? So that goes to the seller, plus the seller can claim for damages, and the onward sellers can also claim for damages, right? So there is a problem there. So why life insurance is important is, let's say for example, a couple buys a property, right? And let's say the main income earner dies before you complete, right? you need to see the sale through, because otherwise you're still liable. So if you have life insurance in place, the life insurance will pay it and you can pay off for the property. Because the mortgage company, as soon as they sort of know that one party is dead, they may reject the mortgage offer because it's within their rights, right? Because circumstances have changed, but you still have to buy the house, otherwise you will lose the money, right? So to make sure that you do that, have your life insurance in place, because you have an obligation otherwise, right? So a lot of people say, okay, I'll buy it after I buy the house, right? Not a good idea, right? Because of course this might be extreme situations, but it has happened. So, you know, we probably want to plan for the worst for sure.
Definitely. Number 5, make sure you can complete. That's an important one too.
Yes, that's right. Again, like I said, once you exchange, you have to complete, right? So between exchange and completion, usually there is still more money you may have to pay the solicitor, like stamp duty. Things like the solicitor fees itself, right? So when you exchange, just make sure you have the money to do the rest of the stuff as well. Because otherwise, you know, you may end up paying damages to the solicitor or, you know, fall foul with the HMRC. So you don't want to do that, right? So therefore, just make sure at the time of exchange that you have all the money in place that you can complete as well, right? So just be very sure that you can do that, yeah.
Number 6, we've got agree on a minimum time gap between exchange and completion.
Yeah, again, I'll take that death example, which is easy. If you have that, it's easy to explain this point, right? Because if your circumstances change between exchange and completion, you've got to inform the bank, right? If one party dies or if you lose your job, you've got to inform the bank, right? So if that happens, the bank can pull out the mortgage offer. So if they pull out from the mortgage offer, you don't have mortgage coming through, right? But you've got obligation to buy the house, right? So that's why we say to keep the gap minimum. Now, for practical reasons, sometimes it's not possible, but most of the time, solicitors manage to do the exchange and the completion on the same day, right? So it'll take a lot of pushing and, you know, all that sort of thing, but try to keep that gap to a minimum. In general, a lot of people have about a 5-day gap. That's not too bad, but obviously things can happen in the 5 days, right? So just be a little careful about that. As much as possible, keep that gap to a minimum. Sometimes this is unavoidable if you're buying a new build, especially because they'll get you to exchange, but the house might be ready after a year's time, right? So, you know, with those kind of situations, it's difficult. But if the circumstances change, you are carrying a bigger risk, right? So the longer you leave it, the risk is more, right? So that's why we say to shorten it as much as possible. If you can do exchange and completion on the same day, if it's practically possible, you can do it. But practically, sometimes it is not possible because some banks say, we need 5 days notice before we release the money. So it will take 5 days, but sometimes you can pull strings here and there and sort of try and get it done. If you can shorten the time period, it's always a good thing.
Thanks, Ifti. Point number 7, ensure you go around the property and make sure everything is in order before you exchange. That's a key point, isn't it? You don't want to move in and then everything's broken.
You know, you don't want to do that. Take that list around, because the list which the solicitor sent and which you agreed, take it around, first thing, see whether everything is there in the property. And if they have pictures, you probably want to move it a little bit here and there and see that there's no holes, because otherwise you got to fill the holes, right? Because, you know, it might be small things, but it may cost you money. You may have to get a handyman in and, you know, it might be inconvenience for you as well, right? So if you want all those things sorted, it's always best to go around the house before you exchange, make sure that everything is in place before you do that. I mean, one of my clients nearly got caught out with this, right? He was buying a property. A few days before exchange, a truck had driven into their back wall, right? So the seller didn't tell the buyer that there's a problem like this, right? So he went to the property, he realized that, and he said, look, wall needs to come up, otherwise I'm not buying the house, right? So the seller made sure that the wall was up before he did anything else. Obviously the seller managed to claim it through his insurance, but otherwise it would have been additional cost to the buyer, right? So just make sure that everything is in order before you buy the house. So it'll be a good practice if you can go around the house for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Point number 8, we've got make sure the movers are all ready.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, quite often this is with a chain, right? You know, the movers have to move at the same time, right? So when one moves out the house, the other one needs to come in. So arrange that in advance. You know, keep talking to the movers when you're close to exchanging. When you're exchanging, and if you have a completion date in mind, before finalizing the completion date, talk to the mover and say, look, we are trying to complete on this day, are you okay? Right? Just ask that question. Because the last thing you want is somebody else come into your house and you are unable to move, right? You know, that won't go down well because legally you have to move out, right? So just talk to the movers, because sometimes last minute if you're going to get a different mover, they might charge you the earth because they know you're desperate, right?
I also feel like it's worth mentioning, don't underestimate how long it's going to take to actually move out, because packing up boxes of a 4-bedroom house or 3-bedroom house, it can take a really long time, can't it?
Of course, yeah, that's right, yeah.
So point number 9, make sure you know how the controls work in the house. I'm laughing, but because that's happened to me before, where I've moved in and I've been like, I haven't got a clue how to work this boiler, and then I'm stuck with no heating.
And that's perfect example, isn't it? Right? You have a boiler, you don't know how to work, right? You move middle of winter, and there's no heating, right? You can call the seller, but seller might be busy moving themselves, right? So you might not be able to get hold of them that easily, and they won't know where the stuff is kept. So it's always good to go to the house before you exchange, ask how all the controls work. Just make sure if there's any manuals that the seller either leaves it out for you, so that if there's a problem you can always go through manuals. Because in the rush when people move, they put these things all over. Sometimes they take the manuals along with them and they don't even realize, because the mover is in a rush to pack everything, right? So they pack the manuals as well. So if you can arrange these in advance, it's always helpful. I think it's best to go around. Like you said, boiler is one thing, your gas hobs and the gas cookers and the whole works, right? So there's so many things that you be mindful of,
I've actually had that too with a touch electric cooker, and I was like, I couldn't get the buttons to work. So definitely, I definitely recommend that. It's a great point. So number 10, we have inform all the bill providers that you are moving.
I mean, this is something that people forget, right? You probably want to put a list down in advance when you're free, right? When you know that you're trying to sell the house itself, you start doing that. But usually when you exchange, when you're completing as well, right? So some of the providers, you can inform them a few days in advance. So start doing that. People like HMRC, you'll have to inform if you're self-employed. Then you'll have to inform your banks that you're moving house. You don't want your credit card to go to somebody else, right? So you probably want to inform your bank. Mobile phone providers, tell them. If you have insurance companies, tell them. If you got pension providers, please let them know. But whilst you do all that, just be very mindful that it's probably a very, very good idea if you do a redirection as well, because there will be the odd one you will miss, right? But that odd one might be the important one, right? So just put a redirection in place, but make it a habit when you do a redirection. As soon as you get this odd letter, just inform them as well, right? Because redirection will end after a while, right? So quite often it's 6 months, a year. I think there's an option for 3 months as well, right? Because those things cost money, right? And you don't want to be spending a lot of money on these things. But do have a redirection in place, because that will always help you if you miss anything.
Yeah, thanks again, Ifti. Some great points again. I just will put out a regular reminder that these points may or may not be applicable to everybody. So please do check with an advisor if you're unsure if they're suitable for you. If you don't have an advisor, then I will leave our contact details below. We offer free advice and we'll be happy to talk to you. And a little reminder that your mortgage is secured against your home or property, so it may be repossessed if you do not keep up with the mortgage repayments. Thank you for joining us again today. We'll be back next week with another episode of Let's Talk Money and Mortgages. Have a great day, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.